Joining me now is Superintendent of Schools Jack Dale. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to talk about a topic that you are really passionate about, which I just really love that. And this is called the PISA test that we have piloted in our school district.
Right.
So we'll have to back up the bus a little bit for our viewers, kind of give an overview of what the PISA test is.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development out of Paris, which has been around for 50, 60 years, over a decade ago created an international assessment in reading, mathematics, and science. And the member countries and other countries could participate in this. And so for in 2000 and then every 3 years after that, member countries participated in this assessment of 15-year-olds. You gave a list of all the 15-year-olds in your country. They randomly selected to ensure you represented your country and it wasn't stuffing the ballot box one way or the other. And then the countries would get results on how your kids performed internationally. Well, actually another a U.S. organization has just come into the forefront by the name of America Achieves, I think contracted with OECD to take the PISA test, which is what that was called, the Program for International Student Assessment, and create a school-based or school version, high school version, so high schools could begin taking that test and getting a sample from their high school population and finding out how their high school kids or that school did internationally or other schools in the country and that sort of thing. So we had this opportunity last spring for high schools to participate. 10 of ours did. The 10 coincidentally represent Fairfax when you average the 10 scores out. And so we now have some very fascinating data, not just on our kids' performance internationally, quite well in fact, but also some other data that heretofore I've never seen collected in any kind of international or even state assessment systems about kids' relationship with their teacher, their belief in their success, personal success in math and reading and science, classroom management issues, some of the background in their families that influences their educational outcomes. So it's fascinating set of information.
So before we get into the results and what we saw, why did you think it was so important for our schools to be involved in this?
Well, I've come to believe, as many of us in Fairfax have, we have to prepare our kids in Fairfax for the world. Not for the U.S., not for clearly just Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, but our kids are going to be competing and working and living internationally. They already have. Kids come from 200 countries of the world. So we need to get our kids and make sure every one of them can function internationally at a very high level. So this is the first time I've seen our ability to gather some information to be able to make some statements about how our kids will in fact function as adults, presumably internationally.
And another point of context, is this the test that the United States always ranks low on as a country, and we get kind of slammed on that
there
we're
are
so
two
far
of
behind?
them. TIMSS is another one, which is math and science assessment. This one is another one, PISA, which is math, science, and reading. So it's the only one that does all three. And we tend to be in the middle of the pack. People will say the U.S. is decreasing, but really what happens is the U.S. is slightly increasing over time, but these other countries are rapidly increasing and now outpacing us. So the top performing countries typically in this assessment, as well as others, Shanghai in China, South Korea, and Finland. Very different cultures and stories to be told and why they are top performing.
Yeah, interesting. Now let's talk about these three areas that we can kind of talk about the test within that framework: rigor, relevance, and relationships.
Yeah, well, we use a framework from Ron Ferguson, a professor at Harvard. And first of all, you want to be successful in a school system, you want things that are relevant, rigorous, and you have relationships with your faculty and teachers, with your students. But the rigor part of it is you want critical thinking, which this test does. It requires kids to take knowledge and skills that they picked up in their education, but apply them in new situations. They've got to critically analyze this new situation and think about how to apply usually multiple sets of information and knowledge and skills that they've acquired into a unique situation. They also make these situations really relevant for kids. An example I was citing recently is a science assessment where kids are asked to look at the results from a scientific drug test, if you will, disease, and then make some speculations based on the data that's presented on how well or not well different components of that disease will be addressed by the different components of different drugs. So not a simple thing for any of us to do, but they're asking our 15-year-olds to do that. So rigor and relevance, and then the last piece, which is very important in an education framework, is kids need to know that when they're learning, their teachers care about them as learners, not just as the individual part. It goes well beyond that, that they're available to help kids. They have a trusting relationship. Kids can go to the teachers and say, I don't get this. Can you help me through thinking through this? And so OECD's created a set of questions that they found to be correlated with kids' performance. The better the relationships, the better the performance. So you even gather that kind of information in this assessment. And our high schools now that are getting the results are beginning to pull this apart and look at the relationships in their math department, their science department, and their English. And then we're also looking at, since this is just 15-year-olds, it's not just the high schools, it's the feeder middle schools clearly, and some late elementary schools. And so those educators we're bringing together to also look at results by each of the 10 high schools that participated.
Right. Okay, so the full details of the results are on our website.
Yes.
I want to tell our viewers that. But in the last 30 seconds that we have, what are the aha results that you came away with?
Well, one of the ahas is we did very well as a school system. We have some really stellar performers in some of our schools, and some that are kind of the middle of the pack in the world, as opposed to all of them being at the top. So we have to learn about that. So that's one takeaway. Another takeaway is this is so much data, and it's richer and deeper and gives us more ability to analyze the most important things, and that's around the policies that drive what it is we bring to the classroom, how it is we teach, how we train our teachers, the kind of culture and environment that we create in our schools, because this gives you data on all of those fronts and even more. So it's very complex, but it gets at the richness of education.
So this is where we're headed, do you think?
I would think we'd better be headed there, otherwise the rest of the world will leave us behind.
Very good. Thanks so much.
Thanks.